Vilas, welcome to Stories in AI. How are you today?
I'm delighted to be with you. It's a nice day here in Washington and excited for our conversation.
I was so looking forward to this, and I'm so grateful that we connected when we did, maybe probably a few weeks ago, or like maybe a couple of months ago. And even that brief conversation we had about just discussing what we're going to talk about here just got me all excited. And I have tons of questions I want to know more about. I'm sure the audience is also going to know more about. But why don't you get us started with your background, your personal journey across tech, policy, philanthropy, and AI, of course. So give us a flavor for Vilas as the person.
Oh, you're super kind. Thank you. I'm excited to share. I will tell you that the thing that drives me every single day is we're at this critical moment in human history. And I will tell you two things about me. One is I'm an incredible optimist about what we can all build together in the world around us. And the second is I'm a very impatient person. I feel like if we can build a better world, we should be doing it every day. We should be spending our time on it. So those are the two things that you'll hear probably throughout this whole background. I've spent my career kind of at the intersection of technology and civil society. How do we use these incredible
Right.
opportunities of these things that we're building to make the world a better place? So I studied computer science. I worked on what we called artificial intelligence nearly 20 years ago. And since then have taken a path that's brought me into the world of law, into the world of business and entrepreneurship, and now into the world of philanthropy.
That is just amazing. And talk to us a little bit about what you do at the foundation and what is the foundation's core mission, if you will, and how is all this coming together in your journey as well?
Sure. So I lead an institution called the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. And Patrick McGovern was a kind of a giant of his
Right.
time. He was one of the first people to create a technology publishing empire that said, there's incredible things happening. We should give people access to them. We take that kind of same
Yep.
principle and we apply it to the world today. We think about the possibilities of artificial intelligence and data science. And we say, how do we apply these tools to human challenges and human problems in ways that bring incredible power tools to pretty big
Mm.
problems and put people at the center of it all to actually solve and create better outcomes?
No, it's pretty awesome. You called out a few things there that's, I think, very important to double click and understand it, right? People think of artificial intelligence as the narrative that Hollywood has written for everybody. It's like Skynet and Terminator and stuff. But in effect, at the end of it, it's a tool. And then they're focusing that tool into the right, or a set of tools or bag of tools, and focusing that to the right outcomes that you want to actually drive a more equitable view of the society. And I love what your I think it was your mission statement that talks about the foundation focuses on advancing artificial intelligence and data solutions to create a thriving, equitable, sustainable future for humanity. I thought that was extremely powerful because on the one hand, you see this powerful technologies like artificial intelligence, the ability to reason and understand and really extend our cognitive spectrum, almost like extending our consciousness, if you will, by using external sources and algorithms on one hand. What it also does is actually amplifies all the things that are good and bad about us human beings, right? So it's the importance on being equitable, being sustainable, being actually making sure that you're pointing this in the right direction becomes all the more important, right?
I love the way you
Um,
put that, Ganesh. And in so many ways, you took the words right out of my mouth, right? I like science fiction as much as anybody else. And I love stories about robots and AIs that do all kinds of crazy things. But the
yeah,
reality of the world we're in today is very different from the Hollywood version as you described it. And you said something that I just resonate with so deeply. The idea that these tools, instead of trying to create a brand new agenda in the world, they amplify what makes us human. We haven't even
yeah,
begun to explore what the possibilities are. When we can use these tools to really spur and accelerate human creativity in the arts, in the creation of new, sculptures and paintings and music, in ingenuity, in
yes,
new technical developments and industrial developments, in our ability to connect with each other, right? So much of what's happening around the metaverse and these emerging technologies driven by machine learning, there is an incredible set of opportunities ahead. But there's always a but, right? But the
yeah,
ownership of decisions around what that future looks like is the big thing that we need to tangle with today. When we think about an equitable future, we know many futures are possible. Many of them have AI as a big part of it. How are we going to make sure that the benefits that are created actually accrue to all of us in ways that are fundamentally fair, that respect human dignity, that make sure that everybody who wants access to opportunity has it.
No, it's amazing, and the one, and my journey in AI started about a little over a decade ago. And one of the things that resonated for me was like I used to always hate doing anything that's mundane, and anything that I cannot automate really frustrates me. And I was always wondering, like, yeah, instead of just doing automating the simple tasks, I would rather be just honestly sitting and thinking about things, about how, at an abstract level, trying to solve problems and then go apply and focus on that, rather than doing math or doing, calculations and stuff. So that was my origination, is like this was, if we really played this card right, and building AI to be totally omnipresent and in fact even invisible, that these intelligent agents just sit in different parts of it assisting the human beings, what you're really doing, like you said, is amplifying the human potential, amplifying the human ingenuity and creativity, if you will. So that definitely resonated. The last thing what you said on the bud side, right? The bud, the challenges with this is you called out the word accountability, right? And I think the whole note, the ownership of decisions, right? And I think it's a very nuanced thing, because people tend to think of, how do you do responsible AI? Oh, just make sure you have the right tooling in place to, understand bias and this thing. I'm like, no, it's bigger than that, because it is still a tool that is an extension of somebody or some bodies or some organization's agenda, right? So the accountability doesn't really reside on the software piece. It's on the person who owns it, who builds it, who develops and promotes it. And that needs to be comprehended as a total framework, right? So I totally agree. And I think that's what also, when I did my background and research on the foundation and yourself, that really fascinated me, because this is not a technology problem. This is a humanity problem, aided and augmented by technology, right? Um, so Vilas, what is exciting in AI about you? What's happening in AI today that really captures your attention, imagination?
Yeah. So, there's so much in what you said that I think is worth that conversation. But let me talk about excitement first, right? I led off with this. There is all of this incredible potential out there. And I could take you through a list of 100 different applications, each of which has the ability to materially change our experience in the world. From the use of machine learning around rapid creation of mRNA vaccines, right? New drug
Right.
discovery, the use of data systems to help governments. And this is one of my favorite use cases, understand across a population, not just where acute health risks exist, like pandemics, but also these long term non communicable diseases. To say we can use machine learning to understand how we can go to a particular village or town and understand the behaviors that are leading to a higher rate of malnutrition among young children. We can do the
Yep.
same
Yep.
analysis on educational systems. We can say we can finally have granular tools that let us understand why some classrooms just underperform others. And much more importantly, develop the interventions that will go and change it. So, again, as we look across this broad spectrum of challenges, in every single one, there's an opportunity for use. But where I think about that, one, of course, we should continue to spur the creation of these new interventions. But we also have to move out of a world of pilots and move into a world of products. And again, this is our unique positionality as a civil society institution, is when we look at all of these incredible interventions and we say, particularly in the private sector, the amount of research funding that's going to build these products, there's a great opportunity to bring those over and say, let's apply them to populations around the world that are at risk and vulnerable
Mm.
as well.
No, it's pretty awesome, and in many ways, what you've described about, we want to move from pilots to products, is a representation of where the overall broader AI market is, right? I mean, if you really think about it, 5, 6, almost 10 years ago, when everybody started on this journey, organizations started doing with, hey, I'm going to do AI. It was all about just building a machine learning model to do some prediction from some set of data and then calling it done, right? And that, at best is a pilot. And in today's world, that's even not a pilot, right? Because then you start understanding, like, hey, how does this become a system that is driving a semi-automated or fully automated decision framework, and this becomes an augmentor to actually just push that through. And then that's when now people are starting to think about saying, okay, where's the data coming from? How do I deal with that data that are going to use it? What kind of user experience can we actually put in play? What kind of governance framework do I put in to actually show this? So that totality of how does this AI or the model which is a part of a larger ecosystem of technology stuff and humanity stuff, if you will, come together to solve a problem, that becomes more productized and product oriented, right?
Yeah,
Um,
Ganesh,
and
I think about a four-part kind of structure that is across all of our civil society work as well as the work of AI, and it's this transformation of data into information, information into
mm,
insight, insight into wisdom. And I think you're absolutely right. Where we've been for the last 10 years is really figuring out that first part of it. How do we go from these massive sources of amorphous data and figure out how to turn them into information, the kind of thing where you can say, I can now engage with the behaviors that this data represents. That's something that
yep.
is incredibly important and it will itself drive massive efficiencies. But the opportunity that
Yeah.
exists now is to go from information to insight. And as you talk about
Oh,
decision making, a topic that we think about all the time, this question of how do we go from understanding how to define a problem to understanding what the characteristics of the problem are to then making the leap to saying here are interventions that might actually allow us to address it. That's where we are today.
no, it's so incredible, and thanks for. I love that framework of data to information to insight to wisdom, because that's when it truly becomes ingrained and integrated into the civil society and what we do, right? And it truly becomes invisible. Then we don't talk about microprocesses anymore, right? Because it's embedded in the way how things are happening, right? So it's fascinating, and you're right. I think one thing people, I have a lot of entrepreneurs who come to me saying, is it too late to start a company in AI? And I tell them, like, it's yeah, funny you ask, because we're probably in the early beginning of a 1,000-year journey on what this can actually go and empower across the world, right? And so I think you're right. I think what has happened over the last couple of decades, and definitely in the last decade, where the innovation has actually skyrocketed, is it kind of democratized access of tools to put all these, anything that we call AI, with machine learning models, deep learning technology, open source code, research frameworks, all of that, even including big, large language models like the OpenAI. So all of that is made it easy for people to start building with it, right? So in my view, right, when I think like an entrepreneur or builder, I'm like, this is the golden time to build companies and organizations and businesses and products that has much larger impact, because the building blocks are already there. You just have to figure out the recipe to solve a problem, right?
Yeah. I love that,
Fascinating.
Ganesh. And the insight there, I think, is so important, right? And I will be provocative and say to you, maybe it is too late to build most of what we call AI companies. But what I mean by that is not that we shouldn't be doing the work, but it's not really AI companies we should be building. We should be building companies that solve real problems that use
That's
AI
true.
as one of a stack of tools. There will be a few
I
pure AI companies, and they're absolutely necessary to advance the basic infrastructure of the field. But we're ready now. We have enough tools that we can actually go out and begin to build incredible things that address each of these problems at scale.
No, that's so true. So I totally agree. Now, we show about AI, we talk about AI, and there's all this evolution of things like crypto, metaverse. The technology spectrum has just widened so much, right? Started with just internet to, giving access and ubiquity to now all of these other things. How can technology in general and AI in particular be a force for good in
Yeah.
the society? I mean, what's your perspective on it? How can we shape this or point this to actually be a force of good?
Yeah, I love this question because in so many ways we look across the last 20 years and we see the incredible advances in human welfare that have been driven by technology. But they've happened in a way, I think you described it earlier, in a de facto way. People building things,
Yeah.
letting them loose in the wild, and it's happening and happening well. But we're at a point now where we could take a moment to step back from the direct and active creation of tools and say, what are we trying to design for? I think a lot about a metaphor that I'll share with you briefly, that we have incredible technology innovation engines in our private companies, in our government funded research, in universities. And you think about how they do their work. And I use the analogy they have amazing earth movers and tractors, they have cranes and steel, and they've been asked to build beautiful, shining skyscrapers. And then we have the folks at the front line of meaningful human challenges like hunger, like access to medical care, like education and economic opportunity. And if you'll permit me a little bit of poetic license, it feels like we've asked them to take a plastic shovel and a bucket and go down to the beach and build a bit of a sandcastle.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yep.
make
No.
sense yet
True.
for me, right? And so to come back to your question, I think we have a moment now to say, let's make sure these tools are equitably accessible, that organizations can use them in ways that are meaningful. I think there are four key design principles that I often think about. The first one is, how do we make sure that we're building tools not just because the tool itself makes sense, but because it's defined around a challenge, around a community that faces a problem, and that we're building tools to suit. I think of community led design as
Mm.
one of the most powerful things that's come out of the last 20 years of work, of thinking about how we first integrate what a community says they need. We integrate a community's technological aptitude and capacity. We integrate external innovation resources, and together we build a tool that works. I'll give you an example. We work with an incredible community of folks that are operating at the front line of climate sustainability in rainforests. And their work for many years has been addressing illegal poaching or illegal logging that's happening on long held
Yep.
indigenous lands. Well, these folks have operated by virtue of pretty analog mechanisms for a long time. They signal to each other where activity is happening, they go in and they try to address it. They've been incredibly effective. But over the last 5 years, we've seen the creation of a new set of tools that bring together all of the opportunity of big data inside of global positioning satellites, in terms of GIS, in terms of mapping, and translate it all the way down to a tool that can be used on a, not exactly the latest generation of cell phone, but a smartphone that then allows these frontline defenders to say, we don't need to know anything about the underlying data set. We just need to be able to act on the information and insight that's created because of it and go and address loggers and poachers where they are in the moment. This idea of community led design, I think, could be really powerful across Web3, across the metaverse, across AI, all of these
Yep.
things. It's a start, right? It's a start of a set of digital design
Yep.
principles. I'll just briefly mention a
Nice.
few others, and there's four in total that we talk about all the time. We talk about the inclusion of values in design principles. Again, going back to this model of what architecture might look like, we started from building buildings, but at some point we said we need urban planning as well. We need to make sure that there's equitable access to different kinds of mixed use zoning. We should do the same thing for technology. We should center values
Mm.
around privacy, around individual sovereignty and agency. And when I talk about the shoulds here, this is a suggestion and a normative framework for entrepreneurs, for companies building these tools, and for civil society organizations that are acting as contractors, customers, or as shared architects. We should make sure that we
Fair.
leverage domain knowledge. This is a big one for me. We spend a lot of time working with our partners across sectors. And if you think about, and you mentioned earlier, conversational AI, the amount of experience and research and work that's held inside of those domains is incredible. Well, we work with an organization that set out to say Google Translate or these translation engines will take us across 80 or 90 of the world's languages. But what about the thousands of ancient languages that are dead or dying? And so they set out to say,
Yep.
let's actually capture some of these indigenous languages and begin to apply machine learning techniques to create open language around them. And now you have these incredible stories of grandparents sitting down with their grandchildren and able to convey stories that are held in these ancient languages in ways that can be translated and transcribed and brought forward to future generations. It's an incredible
That's
story. And
amazing.
when you watch it happen, you realize that there's two things at play there. One is certainly a set of human considerations around continuity of people and stories. But the
Yeah.
second is also bringing these new ideas that are very old and ancient into a modern marketplace. And it creates opportunities again for entrepreneurs to build businesses that sit on top of this. To say, how do we ensure that these kinds of values, principles, and stories are informing the creation of new products?
Yeah, I don't know who said this before, but I think somebody mentioned this comment. I'm maybe butchering it, but the insights for building the future is always in the past.
Oh, I love that.
It's very true, right? There is so much depth in the richness of history that we just look at it from now with the new tools, look at it from a new light, will open up a lot more creativity and opportunities.
Absolutely. I love that. And it's just incredible just to capture that last point to say, how do we take a world that is so analog in its wisdom and use digital tools to translate it right back into human experience? It's almost like a filter
Yes.
function, right? But By creating
Yep.
efficiency in the middle, we don't actually fundamentally change anything about the human experience. We just ensure its continuity and growth.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
it's fascinating. I love the 4 points, right? And then I think um, we did community led design, value engineering, and into this thing, domain knowledge, and then you were gonna give me one more.
And then the last one is maybe the most common sense of them all, right? How do we make sure that we're centering people and problems rather than
Yeah.
profits and products, right? This is something
Yep.
that goes to the core of all of our shared work. And I hear it from my partners in the private sector all the time. I hear it from CEOs of Fortune 100 companies who lead from a people first perspective in the design and development of their products, their business services, their mechanisms. We need to imbue that same
Yep.
principle into technology design as well.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. And in fact, I think this is so, I can draw a parallel onto, and I'm sure you can too. You're an entrepreneur yourself, is for entrepreneurship and tech entrepreneurship and difference. In particular, these principles still apply to just building any kind of technology, not just to benefit the civil society, right? Community led design, as you, if you will. I think it's so incredible. And what Web3 and crypto really has taught us is that there's a lot of power in it, right? I mean, the latest trend in building companies or projects are like community sourced designs, right? You're actually engaging them and you're building it in the open so people can contribute, they feel engaged, they actually are a part of it, everybody gets shared ownership, and things like crypto and DAOs and stuff just creates the tools and the mechanism to make it work. But embracing that community and building for community and bringing that in is important. I love the way you said like value, imbibing or inserting values. And I think we had rule-based systems earlier. Now with the evolution of these algorithmic things, it's important. You can't really program a rule of how the algorithm should provide a prescription or a prediction of something, but you can give them a set of values and guardrails to say, make sure that when you do this prediction, before you say it, go back and check this. And I'm kind of humanizing the algorithm a little bit, but that value imbibing or inculcating values is so important. Domain knowledge. I think the one biggest thing I would say that I've noticed, and back to your earlier comment on the first generation of AI companies was just building tools for everybody to build stuff on, right? But then the big opportunity, if you're building a company, if you're building, AI systems, if you will, is to really get deeper into the domain, do adapt it to the domain that you're going to solve for, because that's where the outcomes are just exponential, if you will, right, compared to other things. And then lastly, the people centricity. I think I couldn't agree more. I mean, you just basically gave the framework or the prescription for, hey, if you're building a company, you're building a product, you're building a project around this thing. If you just cover these four bases, you're in a really really good spot, right?
Yeah, if we were in a
It's
poetic mood, we
amazing.
might actually call it an algorithm for algorithm design, right? These are the steps that you need to go through in sequence to kind of get to validating your outcome.
Exactly, exactly. I couldn't agree more. So, one question on the other side, like, governments, right? So, what is the role of governments in making this happen? And I also want to explore, like, organizations like yourself, like not for profit and stuff, which is like not really government, but you're driving advocacy, you're driving tools. There's so many different things in there. But what is the role of governments in all this? And are we doing enough as a nation, as a global society?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me take it in reverse order. I'll share with you what we do and use that to guide a conversation about what we think governments should do, right? And I think probably for your audience in particular, we're a different kind of organization. So we are first and foremost
Sure.
a philanthropy, right? And in many ways, that feels like we are an organization that allocates public capital in the form of grants. But we're quite a different philanthropy. And what I say is grant making is in our top three priorities, but it's not the top one. Really, instead of being an organization of public capital, we're an organization of public trust. And in a moment in time when these decisions are being made, we try to amplify the voices of those who are trying to step forward and say, when we make decisions about AI, we should include a broader swath of America and a global population. So we do that through a few mechanisms. The first, as I mentioned, is we make grants to nonprofit organizations to build and use artificial intelligence tools. And through that, we get to really understand incredible community led efforts. I mentioned some of them earlier, and I'm happy to go back and share a few more. But the second thing we do is we also realize that simply providing money and capital to organizations and saying, go and use AI, that's not where the world is today. And so we've really
Mm,
invested in building an internal capacity of data scientists and technologists that can actually help organizations with direct service to provide technical assistance to say,
Yep.
let's help you build data maturity inside of your organizations. There's a very clear analog, as you can tell, to our private sector advocacy as well, right? For many of the organizations out there that
Sure.
really want to use AI, they're not yet at the place where they can do it directly themselves. And we need to build these infrastructure pieces of support. And the third piece is we ask some fundamental questions around long term transformation of society. When AI truly is pervasive, when the benefits of Web3 and Meta and the new technologies that'll come, what does it mean for fundamental questions about civic participation, about access to economic opportunity, about rights in
Hmm.
data and rights in sovereignty? And so the work we do is to begin to ask the question, what are the new institutions we need to create as a society in order to
Yeah.
protect the most vulnerable, but also, and equally important, to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunity ahead? So I'll take that last bit, I'll turn it into your question about governments. At the end of the day, we think governments are going to be the primary regulators of this space. Whether they are today
Hmm.
or not, that is going to have to be a necessary part of our shared political compact. But in order to make that happen, there are some necessary precursors, right? The first is we need to begin having a common tech vernacular in our discussions with government. I'm sure we've all seen some of the recent congressional testimony, and for technologists in
Yes.
particular, it's been a little bit cringy at times. So we want to invest in sharing a learning journey for policymakers, for administrators, and for technologists to actually be able to say, before we try to have the conversation about regulation, how do we have a conversation
Good.
about a shared basis of technical understanding? Super
Yep.
important.
Yep.
The second part is in
Extremely.
terms of policy, there's no other entity that exists in the world today that can effectively do AI policy. And so we're seeing the EU attempt to promulgate some new regulations. The US is putting
Yep.
together a new set of advisory boards. Other governments, and we talk regularly to them, are all trying to address this question. And we think there's a real opportunity for cross border learning around what these policies will look like. And so, as a civil society organization, we're deeply involved in those conversations and trying to bring governments together. And the third bit, and it's we have to be quite explicit about it, is there is no funder larger than the government in terms of research and development of building these new products.
Yes.
And I think that we really need to come together as a society and encourage government spending on research and development for public use AI and data tools. That this shouldn't be something that's driven entirely by the private sector, that federal research and
Yep.
development dollars should be guiding this as well.
No, I love that framework again. One of the things like on educate the common vocabulary, I couldn't tell you. I mean, that's such a, I wouldn't say easy, but like something that is so tactical that we can just, we have to do. It's almost an impossible thing not to do, right? Because if you don't do it, we're going to continue to see the same thing play out and on, because you're creating two different parts of the society, the technology haves and have-nots, right? Who have the understanding and do not have the understanding. So that's so important, and especially if you're in government and lawmaking and policy making. I think the good news is there's a lot of, you can see even the policymakers landscape. There's a lot of evolution, folks who actually understand or from this background are just being part of it. But we know we don't have term limits in Congress, so we still have a lot of folks who don't understand it. So that is amazing. I love the way you said that on the notion of the EU. There's opportunity for cross-border learning, being able to share and stuff. And if you really think about like the work Singapore is doing is actually way more advanced in than even what EU is trying to do. Now, the one thing that I would say that you called it, they will play the role of a regulator, right? And it's interesting. Can they only be the I'm gonna use a stick to make sure you don't do something bad, or can they also be the carrot person by creating those opportunities? And that's the last part, which is funding and R&D, right? And I think China, of course, if you the last almost a decade, if you look at their 5-year plans and 10-year plans and stuff, right? The R&D dollars that is going into, or yen that's going into AI specific research and development is just incredible, and I'm sure we'll catch up and we'll actually overdo that on our end too. But I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more how
That's
critical
right.
this
I
is.
appreciate that, and I will just I appreciate your nudge there, and I think that's a very fair point that we should think beyond funding to think about positive incentives, right? And how do we actually
Yeah.
create? And so here too, and I'll just share one last thing with you. I mean, we think a lot about And we've made significant investments in supporting a workforce and an educational journey here in the US that goes through a model that I
Mm,
think of as digital exposure, digital literacy, and digital mastery. The point is, it's not just congressional folks that we should be thinking about in terms of creating a common tech language. It actually should be a part of our core educational process so that we're building a
mm.
citizenry that's able to engage with these topics. And at the same time, we should be lifting up and championing those people who are using AI for meaningful social progress. And so I think you'll see a lot over the next 5 years of awards and bringing that kind of incredible innovation into the public space and saying these folks should be celebrities, these initiatives should be in the public eye, and we should be championing good work.
That is amazing. I mean, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, and I've always been a technologist in my life, right? Been building companies, products, within companies and building companies and so forth. And being in AI, one thing I noticed, I think it was probably late 2020 is when it really hit me. Post COVID, all the things that are happening, and everybody's just turning inward because you can't go outside and turn outward. So everybody's turning inward and trying to find out. And one of the things that really impacted me in a like from a what I was seeing I think it was Kathy O'Neill's book that I read that kind of gave that, which is about the weapons of math destruction, which
Mhm.
talks about how you can use the data to lie, and you can shape it, and you're automatically skewed to actually exclude certain parts of the society and so forth. And I just take a step back and I looked at who was driving the AI agenda in 2020, and I was shocked. It is literally a handful of people,
Yeah.
including top researchers, top dollars, and advertising budgets. I like to always joke that half of AI's research budget around the world is paid for by online shopping and click through rates, because I
Yeah.
mean it's Facebook's
Yeah.
research, it's Google's research, right? So, and I mean, very candidly, that the motivation for me to actually start Stories in AI was just to get that whole thing. How do you get more and more people into the fold and be a part of this process, right? And it starts by, as you said, educating themselves, they're learning about it, demystifying it for more people, and then make it easily accessible for this. One of my most, I would say, the lovely outcomes of this that I really enjoy of doing Stories in AI, this podcast, is I get a lot of young up and coming folks who are in college or about to graduate or going from high school to college, reach out and say, look, this is great. I'm learning a lot of these things because everywhere I go, I only learn the technical side of what it is, but I don't understand the impact of what that technology really means, and you're helping us understand that. So those and what I'm realizing is what Stories in AI is also building a community of those, really, energetic, young, hungry folks who want to contribute. I mean, we just have to give them the right direction. Say, here's where you got to point them to. This is the problem you solve. This is how you make the biggest impact with your life and for humanity. And it's just, I think the like going back to the first comments you made, we live in such amazing times, and it has never been so easy to get the word out, which is also causing the challenges around like fake news and stuff. But it really is an amazing time where you have a lot of those foundational, fundamental things is already there, and you just have this wide canvas that you can just paint the portrait of your life and for the benefit of humanity, right? So pretty amazing. Thanks for. I love those. That what should governments do? Wish I can take that. I'll take that as a segment, send it to government leaders that I know, and say, "Watch this."
There you go. I appreciate that.
Vilas.
I like this, Ganesh, in our conversation. Since we have a common tendency towards poetry, but I love the way that you put that. This canvas that exists that we are all co-creating and co-drawing on, and we get to make some real choices about what our future looks like, and that
Yes.
comes with an immense
Yes.
responsibility as well, right?
Yep. No, absolutely, Vilas. Now, one last question for you. What worries you?
Yeah,
We're in this point. We're actually doing a lot of things. It's a lot of optimism around and stuff. But what's the doomsday scenario?
yeah. Yeah, and I'll tell you, and I'll be quite blunt with you. For me, the doomsday scenario isn't a technology question. It's not. There are a lot of things we need to think about: AI and warfare and weapons and all of this other stuff. But to me, the real doomsday scenario is one where we just give up our ability to make decisions about our shared future. And I say this often, right? There's a moment in time that we're approaching now where Technology is doing two things at the same time. One is it's becoming so intimate. It's crawling down into your brainstem, as some folks say, right? It's getting to know you in ways that you might not know yourself. At the same time, it's becoming more and more alien. If you don't have a
Hmm.
technological background, you don't really know how the pieces fit to create AI. And so this thing is happening. And I think it's important to note and to discuss and to really put in the crosshairs is if we don't step forward and say we want to own our technology enabled future, then decisions will be made for us in ways that aren't necessarily going to highlight our well being. That's what scares me. And so, what you're doing around stories and AI, these kinds of activities that take these decisions and make them accessible to populations across the world, I think is where we need to be focusing. We should be spending our time in making sure that these stories are universal, that they're held by all of us, and that we build mechanisms and feedback loops so that people can express their political agency around technological issues. I think there's a path forward, but we have to be careful about it.
It's the, what a beautiful way, to wrap up the conversation too. But I love the way you said it. Like, the only the doomsday scenario that you worry about, and I think that's something everybody should be worrying about, is we losing our agency to make those decisions for a shared society, right? We're just giving up, right? I think, and which the optimist in me and looking and say that's a solvable problem, right? That you can solve by making sure that you're creating incentives, motivations, habits, and systems to go make this happen. Whereas you are doing an incredible amount of work in this field, and I'm so grateful to have known you, and to be in this journey. And I can't wait to see what the foundation, yourself, and everybody, the impact of this. And it's already seeing. I took so much notes. I'm gonna go research. I might actually come back with you a lot of these questions. It's just amazing stories, and these are the stories we should be talking about. I mean, like I was just candidly, I was looking at the impact of AI in the Ukraine war that's going on right now, right? And well, the good news is, the good guys have the AI technology more than the bad guys. But that, we can't really say that because of the hackers and stuff in Russia. But the one side is using, AI powered drones to actually identify targets and destroy them and stuff. But this could easily be anybody who can build this technology. That's the other problem, right? Whereas this, if you don't have the guardrails, you don't have the systems, you don't have the governance mechanism to go do it, and you don't participate as an individual, as a civil society member in that journey, then somebody else is going to make decisions for you. It's going to be like anything else that has happened bad in history, right? So, um, yeah, no, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for spending this time.
It was a delight. I love the conversation. And as you said, this should be the start of many, right? And I'm totally open. And I hope those who listen to this and see it, if they want to follow up and talk about this, you can tell how passionate I am about it. Always happy to do so.
You're amazingly passionate on this. Vilas, how can the people find you on the internet? Where can they, what are your coordinates?
Yeah, Twitter is certainly a great place at Vilas Dhar and at PJMFND, the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, where we share stories of the incredible work our partners are doing to use AI to make the world a better place. That's a great starting point. We'll go from there.
Amazing. Vilas, thanks so much for taking the time today. This was a fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.